Amy Herrick PhD is a scientist turned identity guide, storyteller, and transgender advocate. His work explores the origins and nature of identity, particularly gender. With a bachelor's in chemistry from the University of San Diego and a PhD in analytical chemistry from the University of Georgia, she spent 25 years as a software engineer, architect, and manager before devoting herself to identity coaching. Amy founded the Purple Paw Clan, a platform combining science and storytelling to support people through gender and identity exploration with empathy and rigor. A full member of WPATH and herself a transgender woman, she guides others on their journeys through one-on-one mentoring, speaking, podcasts, and writing. I'll put all the links into the show notes because it's really worth having a look at the Purple Paw Clan. It's a really interesting website. There's lots of interesting blogs, interesting comments, and very open and accessible content, I would say. So thank you very much for being here. You said that you've known since childhood that something in your words is misaligned, and I wondered, how were your teenage sort of formative years? What was school like for you?
Let me say, first of all, thank you for the invitation to speak with you today. I really, truly appreciate it. I think these are stories that are worth sharing. And I wanted to use that as a preface because I think when I first noticed that people treated me differently than I saw myself, I might have been 4 years old, maybe 5. I mean, it was very, very young, that I felt feminine, and yet my parents and my environment around me wanted to treat me in a way that was distinctly masculine. And this was the early 1970s, right? So everything was blue. I was told my favorite color is blue. I was actually told that. I didn't realize you could actually give somebody a favorite color, but that was what my family did. So very, very early on, I was well aware that my sense of identity was different from how people wanted to treat me. Now, you had asked, how did that end up presenting? How did that manifest by the time I reached my teenage years? Certainly by the time I was 12 years old, I knew that I would transition gender because I'd heard about it. So it was early 1980s, obviously. And there's a joke that I know I heard, and I don't know where I heard it. I kind of want to say it was The Tonight Show, because I can kind of see Johnny Carson straightening his tie after making this joke. But somebody said something about a Swedish vacation, because I think at that point Sweden had maybe just introduced some gender-affirming surgical techniques. I'm not really sure. But I went, oh my gosh, that's all I have to do. I can fly to Sweden, I can have a Swedish vacation, come back a girl, all problems solved. Because this disconnect where you know who you are inside, but other people treat you differently, only gets worse as we go along. When I reached puberty, and these are very formative years, right? Yeah. Very, very important as we sort of try to integrate into a social environment. We're trying to find an identity. And I knew who I was, but nobody else seemed to know. And so that made, at the risk of sounding somewhat anticlimactic after all that buildup, it was extremely difficult to try to build an identity that I could express in my social environment when I couldn't really express what my identity was. Because nobody wanted that. My father was very clear that femininity was not something I was going to express. So yeah, I wish I had I wish I could come up with a bright point of that. But it was pretty much, it was until about maybe 16 years old when I think I was probably a little younger. I'm trying to think when I started expressing my femininity just in private. It might have been maybe 12 to 14 years old or so, when everybody was gone from the house. And so that's kind of what it was. I would sneak moments where I could express who I am so that I could, stand the rest of my life pretending to be somebody I wasn't. And I think that really sort of sums up the transgender experience, especially childhood. We're trying to figure out who we are, and we're being told that as we figure it out, that's just wrong. And it's not really our actions that are wrong, but that we as people are wrong because we know who we are.
Yeah.
All of us know who we are. And yet I was told that was untrue. So hopefully that provided some framework there
Yeah, definitely.
to understand the early experience. But
So when you said that, so when you're age 12, you perhaps saw this Johnny Carson's sketch or comment, and you knew at that point that you were going to transition
yeah,
in later life. What did transition mean to you at that stage? Was that making physical changes? Was that identifying all the time as or expressing your identity as female? So what did transition mean
yeah.
at the time?
Gosh, at 12 years old, so I wasn't exactly the most learned in biology at that point. Although, for what it's worth, so this would have been about seventh grade, I was very very interested in genetics early on in my life. I want to say in fourth grade, so that would have been, 9 years old, I think. I think it was my fourth grade elementary school teacher who gave me some little book about genetics. Because you always do that, right? You got somebody in fourth grade, well, here, learn about genetics. Why not?
Yeah, of course.
Why not? So I was very interested in that because I thought that genetics held the answer, that I knew, because it was clear from people around me that I was wrong. Something was wrong about me. And so I just wanted to fix that. So what transition meant by maybe 12 years old, 14 years old, was really just that I could be seen as how I knew I was. And I wasn't sure what that meant. I figured there would be some sort of genetic intervention. Maybe a flight to Sweden, and they sort of like changing oil,
Yeah.
right? They just say, okay, we're going to strip out all your DNA, put in new DNA, go back home. Perfect. All is well here. So I guess I didn't entirely know, other than I hoped that I would be able to be recognized as who I was. I think I'll just leave it at that, because by 12 years old I wasn't aware what was wrong with me. And I keep using this phrase, that there was something wrong with me. I don't believe that's true. I believe that there was something wrong with the social environment, not to recognize that I was different. And I think that leads into much of where I went later on in life. But I think it's a good question. What was I thinking at 12 years old? I just wanted to be seen.
What was it that led you into chemistry, analytical chemistry, software engineering? What was it that drew you into those fields?
So this early interest in genetics was purely selfish.
Yeah.
Because I thought there was going to be some way that I would be able to fix what was wrong. By the time, so I got about 3 years into a molecular biology degree, so specifically genetics. I was 3 years into it. This was at UC San Diego, and I realized then, as I'm learning everything, all this everything about biochemistry, particularly, processes in terms of how genetics is expressed in the human body. In general, not just human as well, or not just human, but other species as well. I realized that wasn't going to be the fix-it. There was nothing that I could fix. That it was not a genetics problem; it was an identity problem. And I just said that fell out of my mouth. And I guess what I realized at that point was I don't have to do genetics because it's inside me, not a biological thing. So as early as, maybe 19, 20 years old, I was well aware that the biology is not everything of who we are. It's interesting. I just had that little insight that, that was part of why I switched over to chemistry. The main thing was that I had a professor that he was very, very charismatic. And he told me, oh my gosh, I'm losing a graduate student. I don't remember exactly, but he had something happening and he needed to fill a position in his lab. And I said, oh, I'll do it. I'd love to do chemistry research. Why not? It's science, right? And so I went there and I started doing an electrochemistry project. And I'll tell you, I've always loved lightning. And so I'm thinking, you chuckle, but I'm thinking, oh, electrochemistry. It's going to be lightning all over the place. There's going to be one of those, I don't even know what those things are called. You know, that you see them in, Frankenstein movies. As like goes,
Yeah, they're great.
right?
Yeah,
Jacob's ladder, I think it's called. I don't know. But so I thought, oh, that's what this lab's going to be like. Turns out it wasn't quite that romantic. In fact, it was nowhere near that romantic. Very sterile environment. But it did give me something new to learn. And I kind of wanted to take the taste of, I don't want to call it defeat, but it almost felt like defeat to have devoted so much of my life to, I'm going to figure out why I'm wrong biologically, to end in, oh dang, I guess it's not biology. And so I sort of wanted to take that out of what was going on in my head. So starting electrochemistry and learning brand new things was the way to do it. When I got into software, so that finished my undergraduate curriculum as chemistry. As they called it at UCSD, it was called straight chemistry. As perhaps to be distinguished from gay chemistry, lesbian chemistry. So I wasn't really sure.
Which is which, yes.
Yeah, but I finished up the undergraduate curriculum and then I went on to do electrochemistry, to study electrochemistry as a graduate student. Analytical chemistry is about experimental design. It's about statistics. It's about, are we running an experiment in a way that's going to acquire data, that's going to support a hypothesis? Analytical chemistry, this is my own standing on a soapbox. It's really a branch of science that I don't want to say demands, that attempts to keep the purity of science. When we think about science today, because there are so many people, politicians out there, who will say, oh yeah, this is science, right? It's science. And you go, well, what do you mean by science? Science is not a collection of facts. Science is not an interpretation on top of that collection of facts. And science is not legislation that you're going to build on the interpretation of your collection of facts. Science is a process. It's not a product. And so analytical chemistry, a lot of what I learned was, how do you design science so that you come up with observations of nature that are consistent and useful and ultimately internally, did they say the word consistent? So internally consistent, as well as like clean in terms of data analysis and data acquisition and analysis. Now, all of your question was, why did I get into some of these things? I got into those types of things because truth. I'm very interested in truth. And if I can return to when I was 4 years old, I knew truth because each of us knows the truth of who we are. Like, I can't tell you who you are. You can't tell me who I am. But that was what was happening to me. People were telling me my truth was wrong, that I wasn't able to understand my own truth. And so I think that has driven much of my career, my education and then later my career, to the pursuit of truth, which is a lot of what science at least should be about. That was a really long way to walk to find out grandma's not home. I don't.
No. I liked it. It was informative about why you why you moved away from straight chemistry to programming and everything else. Nice. I like the.
No, right.
I think there is a very different view of what truth means. I think particularly in the last few years, we've had the phrases, fake news, we've had truth social, we've had all these different things, that are politically driven, and there's this narrative behind what is truth. I mean, we've got
Right.
somebody with a very different view now that's in charge of the sort of health matters in the US about what their truth is, and it's
Right.
very hard. But I think everybody's, and I'll probably say this wrong, I think everybody's individual truth cannot be wrong if it's some things that they identify. Truth as an overarching concept, is this true or is that true? That absolutely is fact based, but almost personal truth almost isn't founded in fact. If that makes sense. It is made up of what we believe, what we hear, the environment, all those other things. That becomes our truth in a sort of micro bubble. But the broader truth is something that is founded in facts and data and science and all of those other things.
You would think, yeah, you would think. There's in the past few years, because if we were to have had this conversation, say 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and you were to say what was truth, I would say, oh well, those are scientific facts, right? There's just scientific facts, and the words scientific facts don't say that much. In the 16th century, no, sorry, 17th century, I'm trying to remember, there was a philosopher, French philosopher. I'm going to murder his name, and I'm sorry that I don't speak French. Michel de Montaigne is my understanding. He made the point that we should be more concerned about how people interpret a set of data than actually interpreting the data, because how we interpret data will affect what we want to do with it. Because interpreting data, you build hypotheses, and you want to apply these hypotheses. Science, standing on its own, has no utility. You have to take that data to build hypotheses so that you can do something with it. That should be the purpose of science, to improve our understanding of the universe for a reason, whatever that reason may be. So when Montaigne said this, that was really the beginning of the philosophical current of social constructionism. That truth, even when you have scientific facts, and now we have to put these in quotation marks, finger quotes, when you have scientific facts, it really depends upon the social environment that interprets them. And I can give an example, a modern example that will be close to everybody's heart. The data that we have for the climate, for global climate, some of this we've taken for 100 years. We have global temperature data dating back further than 100 years, about 150, 170, almost 200 years. This is not, this is not anything that's political. We also now have a lot of satellite data, how differing parts of the globe respond to different events, weather events and everything. There was a Nobel Prize given to Sherry Rowland for his work on the hole in the polar stratosphere, so the stratosphere in the South Pole there over Antarctica. This is not new stuff. 50 years old, Sherry Rowland's Nobel Prize. Not quite. 45 years old. This is not new, but the models that have been made when we take the data that we've acquired, which is very, very dry and factual, right? We can only have data, we can only have observations, but there are some models that say the universe is going to, recollapse tomorrow, so kiss your loved ones. And then there are models that say, no, we're going to be able to make new oil within 10 years because, we're going to build new dinosaurs and then have new oil. So it's okay if you go out and buy a big, huge truck. Go out and buy a new Range Rover tomorrow. Both of those use the same set of data. How do they come to such wildly different conclusions? How they get there is a social construct. The data is the same, the interpretation is different. And so what we're looking at in this world today, especially when you have Truth Social, you mentioned, executive orders that redefine words science created hundreds of years ago. These are people who are promoting social constructs for the sake of political agendas and calling it science, misrepresenting the word ultimately. And I don't want to say that's only on the side of conservative rhetoric, because it isn't. Unfortunately, we have misuse of statistics to justify anything, right? I mean, if we talked about the definition of sex, which I don't know if you want to get into, neither side has a valid argument. Neither side has a defensible argument. And both sides say, well, yeah, but we have the real science. Well, what's the real science if you end up with an indefensible argument? Because science is founded on the observation of nature. If I can go out and observe nature, I should be able to reproduce every conclusion you come to, right? I mean, science is nothing if it can't be reproduced.
Absolutely.
So to draw conclusions and to say, well, we have the true science, and then when it gets challenged and somebody says, well, we see this in the universe, we see this in reality, I've observed this in nature, and then to be brushed off, you go, well, how did that... Then clearly you don't have science. If you're going to tell me the scientific process is invalid here, where I can introduce new data and you just plain call it wrong because it doesn't suit the social construct of your political agenda, you don't have science. You only have a political agenda. Now, to that point, I don't think it's wrong to have political agendas. We must have politics. But I would hope that people would stop pretending that it was science and not politics, because it's politics. Hold your political agenda. Don't pretend that you're going to be able to justify it scientifically. So, big rant there.
No,
I
I think one of the things with science is that it evolves. I mean, it was literally only
right?
a couple of 100 years ago where we believed that the sun revolved around the earth. We believed the earth was flat.
Yeah.
We believed that if people went on trains above 20 miles an hour, their lungs would explode. We believed it was impossible to run a 4-minute mile. So there was scientific data to support all of those assertions. It's just that things have evolved since then and changed, I guess.
Yeah. Well, as I think it's a good point to return to. Science is a process. It's not a product. A collection of data is a product of science, but that collection of data is never finished.
No. They have some
because we don't know everything.
No, they have some photographs in our media today, and maybe in the US as well. It was the first photographs from a new telescope in Chile. And they showed an image, and they said, this is an image of a galaxy that's 100 billion times bigger than the Milky Way. And when I sort of heard that, I just thought, okay. And I think, well, so no matter what we know, if there's galaxies, this isn't just one. If there was galaxies out there that were 100 billion times bigger than the galaxy we believe in, which we think is extraordinarily big, it's just amazing when you look back and say, this is from not 8 billion years ago. We're seeing this light, and I still can't get my head around those sort of things. But you just think, how do we understand anything? But I think having a focus on things is what helps, I guess, more than anything else. So so looking back to the word transition and your decision at 12 to transition, when did you actually start living life fully as a woman?
So I will say, I mentioned that I snatched small periods of femininity, right? So that was during my teenage years. When I was an undergraduate, I had, I snatched my small moments of femininity. When I went to graduate school, so I grew up in Los Angeles. I'm sure there are people from California right now who are going, yeah, you did. Yeah, I'm listening too. Your vocal patterns, everything is LA. And it is. But grew up in Los Angeles. I went to San Diego for my undergraduate work, and then I went to a very small town, to me, in and I have to say it like that because to me, any city smaller than Los Angeles is smaller. It's a low bar, right, to jump there. Is it smaller than LA? That's a small town. But to a friend of mine who grew up in what I would consider not even a town, it was pretty big. In any event, when I went there, I was given this opportunity. It was an opportunity that I nobody knew me, and nobody cared to know me. That was clear because I was from California and people were kind of like, oh, we can tell you're not from around here. No offense, Georgia. It turns out Southern hospitality doesn't mean that people are Southern and they will be hospitable. It actually means if you are Southern, they might be hospitable to you. I think that's closer to the truth there. So when I got there, I was given this opportunity really to redefine who I am. Mm-hmm. And so I have this recollection. I think it was in the summer of 1994. So I was 24 years old. I woke up and I looked out the window. In this memory, for some reason, I have no window coverings. I've always kind of thought about that. I think about this memory and I go, didn't I have like blinds or something? Even horizontal, just cheap blinds, just anything. Why'd I wake up? Why was I lying in bed? I have no window coverings. These are the types of things that infect my mind. My apologies. Let me move on. Maybe edit that bit out. But I woke up and I looked out the window and I went, oh my gosh. I am attracted both to men and women. How about that? Hey, there's a word for that. It's bisexual. I can own this. It was a really defining moment for me. And a couple of moments later, I went, oh my gosh, and I understand why that could be. Because I am both woman and man. And there's a word for that, and okay, maybe there isn't, I just figured I'd figure it out later, right? I'm sure there's a word. But I was 24 years old when I thought, everything that I am is okay. Everything that I am is who I am, and that's all right. And so I started expressing it much more openly when I was in graduate school. Now that was graduate school, so I had about 4 years and a couple of months where I feel I was very open about who I am. When I got into industry, so now I went into software, and I went into software because analytical chemistry actually uses a significant amount of software. I had to build an instrument to do the work that I was doing, which was electrochemistry, not in vacuum, like ultra-high vacuum, but I did some work where we would do electrochemistry and then move an electrode into ultra-high vacuum. So this is vacuum actually better than the vacuum between like Earth and Mars, which is a pretty low vacuum. This is an even better vacuum. So anyway, I did a bunch of work that prepared me for software engineering, so I went directly into that. And I found in aerospace, if I didn't embrace who I was, if I was willing to give up who I was to fulfill a role in industry, which was the middle-class white man in aerospace, then I would do much better.
Yeah.
And so I threw it all away. I cut my hair. I stopped really expressing the person I was. And I languished. I languished for 25 years. 25 years. So at the end of 2021, by the end of 2021, it had gotten so difficult that, the way that I characterized myself, I was a crabby old man, not waiting to die. I was a crabby old man hoping to die. And I have a wife and a son. But nothing made me happy. And by the end of 2021, my wife said, I think you need to explore transitioning gender. And I knew what that meant because I'd attempted, I don't know if I want to say attempted, I did look into the process of transitioning gender in 2001.
Mm-hmm.
And she had actually known about my pansexual transgender identity from our very first date, literally our first date. So she says, I think you need to look into this. And I said, no, I can't. Because if I do, I have to give up this identity that's been lucrative. I have to give up this identity that allows me to be powerful.
Mm.
I have to give up this identity that is the American dream. And so I struggled with that decision for months. And then finally, I remember it was May of 2022, I said, listen, I got to do this. And so my wife said, go do it. So July 7th, 2022, I put on my first estrogen patch, and that was the beginning of everything. By March of 2023, I had finished a social transition and was presenting full-time as a woman. So that's social transition means I changed my name. I changed all of my documentation. I was presenting full-time as a woman. And then by the following July, the July of 2024, I had completed my medical transition. So I'd been on hormone therapy at that point a little more than 2 years, and I finished all the surgical interventions that I chose to undergo by July 11th, 2024. So I'm just short of a year of living completely physically in alignment with what I felt by 12, and I cannot understate just how profound those effects have been. It's really been, I don't know. I wrote an article about it a month or two after I got because we went to Thailand. Sorry, I should say I went to Thailand for gender affirming surgery. Just a quick plug, by the way, for Thailand. I had no idea. You get told in the United States, they say, we have the best healthcare in the world. And all of us go, oh, of course we do. We're number one, right? Isn't America great? And then I went to Southeast Asia, a place that I thought was going to be so podunk and ridiculous, like I feared for my life. And I experienced the best healthcare I've ever seen. It was stunning to me to see the contrast between what I'm told, this is great healthcare, and then experiencing like actual healthcare. Who knew? Now I do. So there's my plug for Thailand. But when we came back, I didn't think a physical change, like surgical change, would make that big of a difference. But it did. It was so amazing. I addressed gender dysphoria I didn't realize I had. I think I'm going to leave it at that. Mm-hmm. So, because your question was, when did I begin living full time? Mm. I would say we're talking March of 2023. But it was after 4 decades of knowing that someday I would. So it took a while to get to the decision. But I did get here eventually. It's the best thing I ever did.
Do you think there should be it's not age limit, but should there be an age at which individuals, yes, they can express as a woman or as a man, depending on the gender they were born as, but that they shouldn't have medical intervention? Because the reason I asked, there was a big thing in the UK about a clinic called the Tavistock Clinic, and they were alleged that they would counsel relatively young teenagers and would sort of cut the parents out of the loop, and the thought was that they were almost manifesting people to become trans, when we know that isn't true. But and we both know, when we've both got children of similar age, when children are 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, shit, there's a lot going on. There's a hell of a lot going on just in regular life. So I wonder if you thought there should be an age, an age before you can sort of start progressing things that are not reversible, or just start having hormone treatment and things?
Yeah. It's an excellent question, and what I'm going to give you here is my political opinion. All right, I don't. There's science, right? We can acquire data about people. You mentioned Tavistock. In the United States, there was a study just recently released that followed 70 individuals and discuss, to see if they had any different satisfaction sexually, having received puberty blockers and then discontinuing puberty blockers versus people who had not. And it turned out that the satisfaction was identical, literally identical. Now, you can look at this data because part of this data says that of those 70 individuals, 85% reported the most I don't know how to put this. The most dissatisfying characteristic of their sexual expression was occasional failure to come to climax. And it turns out about 85% of cisgender men fail to come to climax. This was exactly the same.
Yeah.
So you could turn that statistic around and say, oh my gosh, look at how ridiculous this is. People on puberty blockers, they got completely screwed up. Turns out they didn't.
Yeah.
Your question was whether is there a good age? I believe so here's where I'm going into my political agenda. All right, my political opinion. I believe that by the age of 4, I knew very well how I wanted to be treated. And I think you did too. I think everybody in the world by 4 years old is enough aware of who they are to determine how they'd like to be treated. And some of that makes sense. I would have just liked, different clothing at that point. And some of it doesn't, because I also probably would have liked to eat ice cream for every meal. That maybe would have not been, somebody probably wanted to curb that. But I knew who I was. And I think if I had been given just the opportunity to express myself differently, it would have been enough. So your question was about medical interventions. I am a voting member, full voting member of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, WPATH, as you mentioned. And the guidelines, the recommendations, they're not guidelines. They can't be enforced. These are recommendations of the standard of care 8. Say that they recommend against medical intervention more than puberty blockers until the age of 18. Personally, I think that's okay. I think that's a good recommendation. Puberty blockers, first of all, give you the opportunity to think about it, to go, well, now that I'm 18, am I willing to begin a course of hormone therapy actually to transition completely?
Yeah.
Would I be interested in pursuing more dramatic interventions? And when I say dramatic interventions, by the way, I want to point out, remember I started as a geneticist, right? There's only one human genome. There are not different genetics for male versus female. The difference between XX and XY genotypes is literally one pair of one chromosome out of 23 chromosomes. And that Y chromosome, I might add, only has about 50 genes on it, the most important of which is the SRY gene, which is the sex-determining region of the Y chromosome. So most of the human genome exists on what's called the allosomes. That's chromosomes 1 through 22. You and I share those with every other human on the planet. They're different, right? Our parents were different, but for the most part, the biochemistry that you have, the biochemistry that I have, is the same as the biochemistry of every other human on the planet. Now, there are certain things that change pathways, biochemical pathways, because what we have are opportunities. Everybody's genotype provides certain biochemical opportunities, dependent upon, in some cases, hormonal balance. So if you have more testosterone, different biochemical pathways occur. If you have more estrogen, different biochemical pathways occur, or more probable anyway. Because genetics is all about probability. It's not about anything specific for the most part. There's a lot of probability going on here. So my point was going to be, I said more significant medical interventions, but giving a human body a hormone doesn't do anything magical. It just gets that person's genotype to do something different. So if you've got puberty blockers going on, and then let's say I had gotten puberty blockers at 14, which is about the youngest that gender dysphoria is recommended to be worked on, say about around 14 years old. If I had gotten puberty blockers for 4 years and then started on estrogen therapy, I would have developed as any other XX genotype person out there, any person who was assigned female at birth, because that's just how genetics works. That's how biochemistry works.
Yeah.
There's nothing magical about hormone replacement therapy. It's just using biology. So that was my bit of science to be interjected with. I still believe 18 is a valid number. It's very common. You'll hear a lot of people today say, well, look at all the people who detransition. There's a lot of regret rate. Statistically speaking, that's untrue. That's a good misuse of statistics. It's easy to pick systematic reviews that support your political agenda. And I don't know. Let me just sum up by saying, I think 18. I mean, if you're an adult and you're capable of making your own decisions, let that person do it. Even if you choose to pursue puberty blockers at 14, you still need your parents' permission. So it's not easy to do. I mean, my gosh, I was 31 years old when I looked into transition the first time, and it was hard then.
Yeah.
I was in Los Angeles, and it was difficult to get that treatment even then. So there's a bit of a rambling answer that I gave you there, but there's so much involved in this.
That's the thing with all these questions. The sort of you're never going to be able to answer any of these in a 1 word, 2 word, 5 sentence way. It's just not possible to.
No, true.
The next thing I wanted to touch on really was that you chose a very interesting time politically to actually finally make the transition. When you started the process, you sort of formally. Some people would say we had very much the agenda coming out of the White House. Some people would say it was very woke and it was all about DEI, about affirmative action, about people can be what they want. There's no such thing as two genders. There are many genders. It was very, very. So people's minds are sort of a work environment, I guess. We've now seemed to have. It's almost like one of those pendulums that's literally swung completely the other way. It's not like it's balanced in the middle somewhere. It's gone completely the other way. And a couple of questions on that, I guess. One would be, I won't ask how that makes you feel, because I can sense how I'd feel, and I'm not transgender. I can sense how I'd feel, and I can't see why it'd be different for anybody else whose very being is being threatened, really, which I think is what it is. And I hope it will come to a natural sort of balance, and common sense will prevail. But if you see commentators, a lot of people have heard of these people, and like you see a Ben Shapiro or a Charlie Kirk. And Charlie Kirk sort of tends to go onto university campuses and seems to sort of throw people with a very simple question that he asks is, what is a woman? He asked the audience that are barracking or whatever. And I wondered if I could ask you, what is a woman?
Sure. I'm pausing for a moment here because woman, the word woman is charged with a lot of charged with a lot. I've mentioned that a lot of science is technically social constructs
Yeah.
that we use to justify political opinions. It's interesting because one side of this gender debate, and then once again I have to use quotation fingers, one side of that says, well, gender is a social construct, right? This is Judith Butler's opinion, first introduced in 1991, right, in their book Gender Trouble. Doesn't actually say exactly that gender is a social construct, but that's the prevailing point to be taken from that book. And it's interesting to have people go, oh, well, social constructs, what a bunch of crap. When actually what we're doing with a bunch of our scientific facts, I'm going to use quotation fingers again. It's a bummer if you're only listening, but using quotation fingers, much of our scientific opinions are social constructs, right? We're taking data and we're interpreting it in ways to justify, I should say, a political opinion. I'm going off on this big long tangent to say, what is a woman is a difficult question because we want the answer to be simple. But it hinges, first of all, on humanity's understanding of what sex is. If you are going to equate sex to gender, then it is a very simple question. You go, oh, well, adult human female. But now you won't need to ask the question because all you've done is sort of delay your definition. Well, what's a female? If you listen to a Ben Shapiro or Charlie Kirk, they say, well, anybody... actually, this is... Originally, they were saying, well, anybody with an XX genotype. And that's now been convoluted. I know I think she's at University of Manchester, if I remember correctly. Emma Hilton has now convoluted this definition to say anything with the potential, or if it's broken, or historical, or actual contribution of a gamete to an act of reproduction, which when you boil that down means XX and XY. I mean, it's the same argument. Because, you ask the question, well, tell me what potential means. Potential means XX. What does broken mean? Well, you have XX, and you should have been female. Historical should be pretty straightforward. But anyway, it's the same argument, XXXY binary. But this definition of sex is about humans, right? It's not, if we're saying woman is adult human female, we're using a word, female, here. It's a designation of sex, but sex is not something that applies only to humans. Sex is a concept that applies to every species that engages in sexual reproduction. And so if you think about that, now we have to go and observe nature. Because how this word got defined hundreds of years ago was based on observations of nature, not on political opinions. I mean, obviously there's a conservative opinion on whether people should transition gender, and this is largely informed by Christian ethics, not much more. And then there's the liberal side of whether or not you should be able to transition gender, and this is informed by those conservatives are a bunch of stupids, so we should just disagree. It's politics today, right? I don't think I'm saying anything untoward. But if you go out and observe nature, you will see that there are many plants that have both male and female parts. That's pretty common, very common. Trees, flowers, many plants that do that. There are fish that will change which gamete they contribute based on social pressures. There are geckos, especially in the United States, Southwest United States, that will lay fertilized eggs. So they have an all-female line because they actually contribute essentially both sides of the genetics when they lay their eggs. The point is that when you look at nature, you realize the definition of sex has to be stripped very far down. It can't include genetics because genetics differs among species. It can't include anatomy because obviously the anatomy of a mammal is very different from the anatomy of a plant. It can't include biochemistry because the biochemistry of species are it's so all of them are very different. You have to strip this down and continue to strip it down until you get to one thing, which is what gamete did you contribute to an act of reproduction? And I have to say that exactly, an act, because some species can contribute both gametes, and it depends upon the act of reproduction. Some species change it over the course of a mating season several times. So, when your definition of sex is based on humans, you're really you're going off, how's this put? You're going off piste. That's what the phrase is. You're already trying to define a concept that is much broader than humanity. So, I make this point to say sex is defined by one thing. Did you contribute a sperm? Did you contribute an ovum? And those two words are change based on species. Obviously, it's different in plants, whether you have pollen, etc. Changes in some ways versus depending upon species. But that's very strictly defined. Mm-hmm. That's simply defined. But everything else that gets you to an act of reproduction, that is species dependent. That's genetics, that's anatomy, that's biochemistry. But in some species, it's also behavior, right? So there's cognition involved. There may be emotions involved. We've seen not just in primates, not just in humans, but social aspects as well. And so all of this, the physical, the biochemical, the cognitive, the emotional, the social, all of this contributes to whether or not one organism, right now I'm not talking about a species, an organism can get to an act of reproduction. And all of that there, scientists understood this long ago, biologists, and gave it a different name, which is gender. So the big distinction here is sex is what happens in an act of reproduction, and gender is basically everything around that gets you to this act of reproduction. So if we were to return to your question, what is a woman? Well, what are the characteristics that, at least in a human, what are the characteristics in a human that could lead to somebody getting to an act of reproduction? Again, we have to end up stripping things down. Is a woman who doesn't reproduce still a woman? And actually, I mean, you could ask a simpler question because you might notice right now, I'm sure you're noticing this, we are not in an act of reproduction. Like, most of our lives are not in acts of reproduction. Most of our lives are getting to those acts of reproduction. It's developing the behavior. It's developing the cognitive characteristics. It's developing the social environment or social skills or whatever to get to these acts of reproduction. And Charlie Kirk knows this, right? He's probably going out to bars or something, right? He's going to a pub or something, going to chat somebody up. That's part of it. So it's a complicated answer because it isn't even a scientific one. It's not something science would even care about, because what science cares, at least in terms of sexual reproduction, is reproduction. The rest of it is behavior. The rest of it is life of an organism, and that's individual. Again, sort of a longish rant. The point to make here is that we want a simple answer. We definitely want a sound bite. There are in many cases, science isn't a sound bite. I distilled it down to one sentence. Well, I guess that was two, Sex is what happens in an act of reproduction. Gender is everything around to get you to that act of reproduction. And I want to invoke a physicist here, Richard Feynman. And Richard Feynman said, I'm going to probably misquote this slightly, but he says, if you're not capable of explaining what you do to somebody who's like in third grade, somebody who's like 8 years old, let's say, then you don't understand it very well. Yeah. So if you let's say you're on the conservative side, you say, well, it has to do with XX genetics. And you have your 8-year-old come up to you and go, oh, Mr. Feynman, what does that mean? Although Mr. Feynman was was obviously a physicist. But, if he goes, what does this mean? And Mr. Feynman has to go, oh, well, genetics, And then if the kid goes, well, what about people who are intersex? What about people with Klinefelter syndrome? What about people this? What about that? What about people who have both? And if you go, we just don't have to think about that, you've demonstrated you don't know what you're talking about enough, that you don't know the science. Conversely, because I don't want to leave the liberal argument out of this, because that one's not good either. When you go to this point where you say, well, gender is a social construct, but then you say that people can be transgender, that our gender identity is in some way a sense of congruence with our sex, you still need a definition. What is sex? What is the incongruence? And the scientists who tend to be sympathetic to the cause say, well, sex is a spectrum. I mean, they just come, here Mr. Feynman would have to go, yeah, okay, it's complicated, I get it. Scientists on the liberal side, they just come right out. They go, you know what, we have no idea. Like, who knows?
Yeah.
Some people have big boobs, some people don't, some people have, whatever. They just say, no, it can't be defined. In which case, I will say again, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know the science well enough to explain it. And, I think this is really the crux of the issue, like why we have these conversations in politics today. It's because we don't have a definition for sex that doesn't justify a political argument. We haven't just gone back and observed nature. Because again, I mean, both of those two are demonstrably false. If you say, well, we can't define it, you go, well, if we strip it down enough, we can never define it. If you look on the conservative side, you go, I mean, I can demonstrate there are people who have XY genotypes, developed female reproductive parts. I mean, so we choose not to go back to nature. We choose not to engage with a scientific process to explain these things. I have to have talked at least 10 minutes here and didn't answer your question.
No, I think in itself answers the question, doesn't it? That's where a lot of people that are good at debating or interview technique will say, no, but what is a woman? But what is a woman? In a sentence, what is it? And everybody knows it.
So here we go.
You can't answer it, but
I'd love to. No, I'd love to, because here we go. What is a woman? I am. It's for what it's worth, it's a very Dagny Taggart kind of who is John Galt, we are sort of thing. What is a woman? I am.
Perfect.
Come at me, bro. Right, I think that should be should be suffixed with come at me, bro. Right.
Just bringing you to the to what you're doing now. So all of this time in science and then data programming and managing and guiding, etc. What was it that compelled you? I think compelled might be the right word. What is it that compelled you to form the Purple Paw clan? And I guess that the sort of follow-on or adjacent question to that is, how does your role or work as an identity coach differ from that of a therapist? Does that make sense to the question?
It does, okay. Yeah. The main reason... So here's what happened. When I put on that first estrogen patch, July 7th, 2022, it might have been 2 weeks, maybe 2 weeks, that I started experiencing very, very dramatic cognitive changes.
Yeah.
I started feeling emotions. That was a big one. I recognized I started feeling physical pain. I guess I didn't expect that. I'm sure there are a lot of reasons why this happened, some of which were biochemical. I think there were biochemical aspects to it. But I believe granting myself permission finally to be the person I knew I was for 52 years was a much bigger contributor than just biochemistry. So putting more estrogen into my bloodstream. Within 2 weeks. So I began about 3 months later. I actually I started writing just about the transgender experience. I've never been a writer. I've never been what I would consider like an outgoing or engaging person. This is my opinion, at least. Maybe you're holding a different one an hour after we started, but
Absolutely.
thank you. But so I started writing, and I just wanted to talk about myself. In standard, science and technology, solipsistic kind of manner. I wanted to talk about myself, and people read it and said, "Oh, that describes me too."
Mm-hmm.
And so I realized I wasn't writing about myself. I was writing about the transgender experience. And then I started thinking about sexuality in there, and I went, "Oh no, I'm actually writing about a queer experience, right?" And then I started just thinking about identity. Where do these come from? Who are we and why are we? And I realized, well, identity is a human issue. Each of us has to develop identity. So I didn't go into this intending to help anybody, I think, is what I want to say. I went into this because I just wanted to understand myself. I'm always a researcher. And after 52 years, I had the opportunity to try to understand what I knew, 52 minus 4. I was a chemist, not a mathematician. So just what I knew 48 years before.
Yeah.
I wanted to understand that. And so I embarked on all this and came to the point. It's not biology. It's partly biology.
Yeah.
It's not cognition. It's partly cognition. It's not by behavior. It's not social. It's a conglomerate of all of this, an amalgam of all of this. And amazingly, I went out, I started looking at psychology at the same time. There is a model, the biopsychosocial model, which has been out there for a long time, that considers human development, human identity, human history to be contributed to by our biology, by our psychology, and by our sociology. So I didn't come up with this, completely in a vacuum. Well, I came up with it completely in a vacuum, and then turned out somebody else had had come up with the same vacuum, which was, maybe valuable. So where was I going with that? Oh, the point was supposed to be that now I had this model that I thought talked about humanity. And I don't think that the gender is something only transgender people have to worry about. You had to. Like today, for instance. So you wear a beard. Today you're wearing a darker shirt. There, you made these choices. I mean, this is gender expression.
Yeah.
You've chosen to be like that. You're wearing glasses. You chose the frames, and all of these are informed by your experiences getting to this point now. And that's the same that I did. There's no difference there. But for the most part, what I see around me is pressure to conform, pressure to fulfill social norms. Fulfill social norms and we will ostracize you. Worse than ostracize you, what we'll do is legislate against you and litigate against you. Don't be who you are. And by 2023, by about mid-2023, I said to myself, I'm not going to let that stand. I can't let that stand. What I decided I would do, so I ended up making this mission statement, sort of a mission statement of sorts. The foundation of all the work that I do now, 2 points. The first point is that your identity belongs only to you. Society has no claim on who you know you are. Period. That's a full stop. The second pillar is that our highest moral obligation as humans in our lives, in this social environment, is to discover who we are and to make it real, to manifest it in this world today. I think that when we do that, we fulfill our purposes and we will live a life of happiness, reward, because we're going to there's nothing, how do I want to put this? I cannot explain the feeling going from 52 years of not being who I am to being who I am. It's difficult to explain. So anyway, that was what I got to, and I said, how can I make this real for other people? So hopefully that answered your first question.
Yep.
We have to do this. This is our purpose. We should not be on this planet to suffer.
No.
We should be here to make humanity better. And we only do that, and there's a lot of clinical research around this, a lot of psychology around this. We make humanity better by accepting who we are, by expressing who we are. There's a lot of clinical research around that. I feel very Trumpy right there, saying it. There's a lot of people out there, good people, smart people, working on things.
Yeah.
How do I differ from a therapist? So I can state flat out, first of all, of course, you said my PhD is in analytical chemistry. I'm not a psychologist. That being said, what I did for half of my career in technology was assemble teams and then acquire like high-level business requirements, and then develop a plan to achieve these high-level business requirements. And while that worked great, in industry, it's the same process that you would use to manifest who you are.
Yeah.
You got to talk about these things, though. Most people, when you go, well, what do you want to be? They go, I don't know. I just want to be a girl or something like that. Well, what does that mean? Do you want hair? Do you want to change? Do you want to learn about makeup? What do you want to do? And so those are acquiring, in my opinion, those are acquiring high-level business requirements. And then you just put together a plan to do this. And so that's what this whole identity guidance started as, for what it's worth. So I mentioned I finished my entire transition in just over 2 years, 2 years and 4 days. That's what it was. And actually, if you were in the United States, it was really 2 years and 3 days, because it was 18-hour difference and whatever. But,
Just to be exact.
right.
I just
So that actually is remarkably fast. Most people can spend a decade going through all of these changes. I did it quickly, not because I was highly driven, but because I was organized.
Yeah.
I don't think there was much more to it. I was just organized. Nothing mystical there. So now that's what I started doing. That's how Purple Paw ended up coming together in the first place. I thought, well, I'm just going to help other people plan this out. In the past 2 weeks, since you and I agreed to have a conversation here, I completed a course to become a certified hypnotist.
Ooh.
Now, certified hypnotists are also not therapists, but mainly because therapists tend to be trained to handle negative reactions to remembering trauma.
Yeah.
And I am not trained to do that. What I am trained to do is address the behavior caused by negative reactions to trauma. We establish patterns very early on. I talked about them. I felt ashamed of who I was because people treated me differently than who I knew I was. So that was a pattern I had to break down. And every transgender person, in fact, I think every human, ultimately has to reach a point where we're going to discard the shame for failing to fulfill these social norms our environment holds and places upon us. So that's where hypnosis comes in. And so while I'm not a therapist, and what I do is not therapy, I help people now. So we discover the goals that somebody would have to manifest who they are, and if there are obstacles, behavioral obstacles, cognitive obstacles, we can address those with hypnotherapy. So I've now called this hypnotherapy-driven identity guidance. Still using identity guidance, but now I've even added hypnosis into it that I think will be very valuable, or that I think is valuable. Just briefly, all of us grow up with a sense of trauma. You know, all of us, we want our lives to go certain ways, and it doesn't. And even if it doesn't feel like trauma, even if we don't identify it as trauma, it can still contribute to patterns that aren't functional, you know, that don't serve us. That much we've seen, again, with a lot of clinical research. So in the queer community in particular, though, it's chronic. It's something that happens every day. From every corner, we're told you're wrong, you're going to hell, you're a horrible person, whatever. We can't escape it. It's mainly what it is. All we can do is mitigate that. And I think hypnosis holds a real key to long-term mitigation of the discrimination that the queer community in particular faces. So that is why I do everything I do. That is how I do everything I do. That's my mission. That's my purpose. I thought I was doing a good thing when I learned about genetics. I thought I was doing a good thing. I was going to be a chemist. I expected to get a Nobel Prize like you do, right? Hang out with Sherry Rowland, maybe. Call back, too earlier than there. And then I went into software. I was going to be a big manager, right? Executive manager, which I was. And none of it was rewarding. None of it. I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that. I think that's the way to put it. And now the work that I do, thinking about identity, teaching people about identity, I've had experiences. I can feel this slow smile showing on my face. I've had experiences where I was talking to somebody and like this realization kind of dawned in their eyes where they went, I can be who I am? And I go, yeah, thinking, why is that not obvious? But it was really, it's this realization. When I see that, it's this spark that suddenly turns into a person. I can be who I am. I can be who I am. It's the beginning of a human there, and I can't think of anything more rewarding. Yeah. I've sort of talked myself out.
I think that's a perfect place to end. I think the notion that I can be who I am, not I can be who I want to be, I can be who other people expect me to be, but I can be how I am, is relevant for every one of the 8 billion people that are on the planet right now, no matter what your country, gender, ethnicity, anything really. It's just, that's what life's all about, really. Well, I'm very grateful for what you shared with us. I am very pleased that after 48 years, you became who you are. And I think your wife sounds like an incredible person, and I'm sure you got support from other people. But living who you are today as who you are must be that must be the definition of success, really. What is success? What is happiness? Well, it's me. It's you.
Right.
It's who you are. It's
right.
Yeah.
I had somebody, just briefly, in a live stream make a comment yesterday who said, I finally feel like a human. And I think that summed it up exceptionally well. I finally feel like a human. I feel like I've been excluded from the human experience for a long, long time, because you have people who go, oh yeah, I feel happy. Look, I have achieved my goals, whatever. And there was always an underlying current of, but, and I think I'm finally past that. I do. I feel like a human. I feel like I am. And there is no reward greater than being able, I would never have said this 4 years ago, okay? But there is no reward greater than waking up in the morning, you're wiping the sleep out of your eyes, whatever, right? Your breath's terrible. You look awful. Your hair's a mess. You look in the mirror and you go, oh, but look, it's me. Oh, that's so huge. To wake up in the morning and look in the mirror and still be able to say, that's me. There you go.
Perfect. Thank you. Just thank you very, very much for everything. I really appreciate what you said and your willingness to be open and to share. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate this invitation so much. Thank you.